after a rough start to 2025 for House Speaker Mike Johnson, things have not gotten better for him. As we tumble headfirst into the second Trump administration, Johnson is already catching flack from members of his own party. First, Johnson denied a Democratic Congresswoman's request to pass a bipartisan resolution that would allow pregnant Congresswomen to cast congressional votes by proxy while they're away on maternity leave. Johnson's denial has actually ruffled feathers on both sides of the aisle. There's the obvious criticism that this is very anti-family from the party of so-called family values, but Johnson says that his decision has nothing to do with that. He says this is a constitutional issue, and since he is, after all, a constitutionalist, he has a problem with proxy voting. Or does he? Well, first, here's what Johnson had to say for himself. He said on NBC News, "I've filed a brief with the United States Supreme Court asserting that proxy vote is unconstitutional. That's been my belief as a constitutional law litigator, and I don't see any way around that. And it's unfortunate. I have great sympathy, empathy for all of our young women legislators who are of birthing age. It's a real quandary, but I'm afraid it doesn't fit with the language of the Constitution, and that's the inescapable truth that we have." An inescapable truth, he says. Well, Democratic Representative Jim McGovern says that Johnson himself has managed to escape that particular truth several times over. He posted a thread on X detailing Johnson's affinity for voting by proxy. Speaker Johnson is 100% correct, receipts below, and he himself voted by proxy. He thinks it's so unconstitutional that he did it not once or twice, but nearly 40 times. Before he gets into his promised receipts, McGovern says that during COVID, he led efforts to allow members of Congress to vote remotely due to public health concerns. McGovern confirms that Johnson did join a lawsuit claiming the move was unconstitutional, but the lawsuit was dismissed in the district and appeals court, and the Supreme Court didn't hear it. Then he claims that Johnson, along with several other House Republicans, removed their names from the lawsuit, essentially abandoning their effort, primarily because they themselves wanted to be able to vote by proxy. And then came the promised receipts. McGovern says that Johnson was okay using proxy voting to give himself an early start on August recess while still casting his vote against a common sense bill to ban assault weapons from our streets. He was okay using proxy voting to catch an early flight home while still casting his vote against a bill to reduce violence in our streets. And no, he wasn't ill. He spoke at a high school the next day. He was even okay using proxy voting to leave town early while still casting his vote against marriage equality. In fact, Speaker Johnson thought it was all right to use proxy voting for the entire last week of the 117th Congress, including to cast his vote against funding the government. He ends his thread by asking the speaker, "If you think voting by proxy is unconstitutional and you're such a constitutionalist, then why do you do it?" McGovern also clarifies that although his colleagues have engaged in proxy voting, he personally never has because he's never needed to. And in such a modern world, it does seem a little old-fashioned for our Congress to demand physical appearances to cast a vote, but I can see how something like that can be weaponized as a matter of political strategy. It has been in the past, with one party scheduling votes at inopportune times, knowing that many representatives would be unwilling or unable to show up and cast their votes. Now, Johnson is using proxy voting as an excuse to exclude Congresswomen from voting, denying them their right and ability to represent their constituents. Ultimately, this line of thinking could have a negative impact on women running and winning seats of Congress. Voters might be less inclined to support a woman if she plans on getting pregnant while in office, which isn't something that employers are even allowed to ask women during job interviews, because should she take maternity leave, which by the way she absolutely should, she would no longer be able to represent the people who elected her into office. It's workplace discrimination, and it's meant to discourage women from entering certain workplaces.
You remember in the late 60s we invented things like no-fault divorce laws. We invented the sexual revolution. We invented radical feminism. We invented legalized abortion in 1973, where the state, the government, sanctions the killing of the unborn. I mean, we know that we're living in a completely amoral society.
But nothing unites quite like oppression. Republican Representative Paulina Luna has also expressed her discontent with Johnson's decision, saying on X, "This is not only anti-family, but is also a slap in the face to the hundreds of thousands of voters who send members to represent them in D.C. Female members should not be forced to choose between representing their constituents and having children. Until Congress embraces changes to reflect Americans' family values, we will not have true representation in Washington, D.C.
It is such a strategic and really a creative means to defend and advance the truth of Scripture in our time. And you speak all over the country and the world on this subject, Ken. The Ark Encounter is one way to bring people to this recognition of the truth that, what we read in the Bible are actual historical events and that there are implications to what you do with all these stories in the Bible there.
That's your new Republican Speaker of the House nut job, Mike Johnson, saying how the Ark Encounter, which is a theme park that's dedicated to creationism, is actually a way for people to realize that what you read in the Bible are actual historical events. But wait, there's more.
Or the Congress has the constitutional authority to limit the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court in certain areas. They could say, theoretically, if their political will was there, if we pushed the issue, the Congress could say, you know what, we don't want the federal courts to be able to decide the issue of marriage. That is reserved to the people. It always has been since time immemorial, and it should stay that way. You usurp their authority, and so we're going to take it away from you.
There he is, floating an idea of how you can get rid of the Marriage Equality Act and stop gay marriage. But wait, there's more.
Tonight, dangerous. That's how former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney describes the new House Speaker Mike Johnson. Cheney once sharing an adjoining office with Johnson on Capitol Hill, so she knows him. And it comes as CNN's Cape File has uncovered details about Johnson's history with a group that promoted gay conversion therapy, a long debunked theory that gay people could be made straight. Here's some of what he said in the past.
It's time for an honest conversation about homosexuality. There's freedom to change if you want to.
There he is, advocating conversion therapy. That's right. If you're gay, they can convert you out of it. But wait, there's more.
What's happened, Alex, over the last 60, 70 years is that our generation has been convinced that there's a separation of church and state, right? We heard that term all the time. And most people think that that's part of the Constitution, but it's not. Remember, I'm a constitutional lawyer.
And there he is, arguing that the separation of church and state is a bad thing and that we should have it come together. Church and state should be together because you should have more church in state. That's a great idea. Yeah, Mike. All over the world, wherever they've mixed church and state, it's really worked out well. Like the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is where I was born. Oh, it's going great. Yeah, theocracy is a great way to go. That's what Mike Johnson wants. Mike Johnson, the more you learn about Mike Johnson, the more scary he becomes. He looks good. He looks very innocuous. Hair's perfect. Wears the tie, the suit, everything looks clean, innocuous, harmless, and yet he wants to get rid of gay marriage. He had ties to Christian nationalism, which again pushes for more Christianity and religion in the state. He's wanting to. He believes in creationism. He believes that the earth started 6,000 years ago. This is a guy who believes in this fantasy, but he's the leader of the Republicans. He's the Speaker of the House. Oh my gosh.